Well, it's Monday, and as always, that means we spend some time with our regular panel of parliamentary journalists. Susan Delacourt, columnist with Toronto Star. Joël Denis Bellavance is the parliamentary bureau chief for La Presse. And John Iveson's a columnist with the National Post and parliamentary bureau chief for Post Media. Susan, let me start with you. And we now have on C-10, the controversial bill on changes to the Broadcast Act and regulating big streaming entities in Canada. It's put on hold now in committee while we get a charter statement, while the ministers come back to testify that no, this bill will not infringe on individual rights of expression for people, ordinary social media users using the internet. And we've seen messaging back and forth from Stephen Guilbeault, the minister, driving this through Parliament. What do you make of these latest developments and how the minister's handled all of this?
I think it's, let me say diplomatically, it's a good thing he has 5 days to try to pull some sort of story together. Over the weekend, we saw him on TV. The minister saying that individual users wouldn't be punished on this or wouldn't be subject to regulation unless they had a lot of followers. And that just opened the door. Again, the problem is with the internet, if this doesn't sound too existential, sometimes we're users of the internet and sometimes we are producers. Sometimes we consume things, sometimes we produce it. And this bill is having a really hard time distinguishing between when we're one and the other. And into that blank, the Conservatives have walked saying, look, you as a consumer of social media, you're going to be punished on this, or as a user of social media on this. And today in the House, it was if you were an artist, you were going to be punished by this. And I think the problem is this is the minister's first real test on this, and so far he's not doing all that well.
John, what do you think of how this is being handled by the minister? And we've seen a number of flip-flops here. What's happening?
Yeah, well, he's not so much driving it through Parliament as driving it off a cliff. It's almost like he's trying to sabotage his own bill. I mean, the things seem to be resolved. There was a furore in committee, an amendment came in, so it's clearly not going to affect users of the internet, and then suddenly he appears on TV and says, "Well, it might." Yeah, and then he had to clarify his own statement. Now, this is
basically saying it won't affect individual users on the internet uploading content unless you get really good at it.
Unless you get good at it, and then there's a disincentive. And this is a number of communications issues that the government has had in recent days with, should you take the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example? Well, one day everybody should take the first vaccine. The next day the health minister says consult a doctor. So there have been a couple of instances where I think that they've kind of lost their sparkle when it comes to crafting the message.
Right. We haven't, at least yet, JD, we haven't come to the question of whether internet social media users should pick one vaccine over another. We're not there yet, but that's still an open question. What do you think of how this is being handled and the blowback the government's getting on this because of this mixed messaging and what this bill will actually do?
Well, it needs the rubber or the approval of the Justice Minister to be sure that it does not affect freedom of expression. So the government has to do a lot more work to convince people that it doesn't have the adverse effect because Mr. Guilbeault failed to communicate a clean, clear message on the intentions of his bill. Now, I would say that Stephen Guilbeault is now joining a growing list of ministers who have trouble with their messaging. I would add to that list Stephen Guilbeault and also Arjit Sajjan, the defense minister. So it's not good for the government to have trouble expressing clear messages on key issues that are affecting the government right now.
Let's talk about the messages going back and forth between Ontario and the federal government, Susan. Doug Ford's ramping up the criticism of the federal government's response, especially when it comes to travelers. And one of the things he's asking for, though, is the government's firing back saying, look, tell us what other tools you need. We're here to help. But by the same token, we've seen some numbers that show that since I think it's April, the vast majority of the spread of COVID-19 is actually coming from domestic travel from one part of Canada to another. So, I mean, does Doug Ford have a point here? I just finished talking to the health minister in the program about whether they need to take further action to control domestic travel and more testing for those people getting on a plane in Calgary maybe and flying to Montreal. Do they need to test those people more and try and stop that spread? So what about this feud here? Where's it going?
Well, I think I wrote about this on the weekend because Dominic LeBlanc fired off a letter to Ontario saying, look, what do you want? We asked you, we're giving you a ton of stuff, and what do you want? And Doug Ford his party has been taking out ads. The Liberals know that ads can hurt them. They've seen that happen to leaders before. I think what I find about this confounding is that Doug Ford was doing very well when he and Chrystia Freeland were each other's therapists last year, when he was cooperating with the federal government. The more this tension between the two of them increases, and we all see the reason why, the worse he's getting. ECO's had a poll out last week showing that only 19% of Ontarians now approve of Doug Ford's handling. That's down from 80% last year. So I think we see what's going on here, but I think Ontarians and both governments did a lot better when they got along, when they stopped the silly games.
JD, what do you think?
Well, I think that Mr. Ford is trying to salvage his government from going downhill from now on because of the way he handled the pandemic by hitting Ottawa. That's the typical recipe for any provincial premiers who's in difficulties in the polls. But I don't think it will work. Mr. Ford has made some decisions, has I think, increased the pandemic problems, and he's facing right now the criticism of the electorate, and he's trying to salvage his government by attacking Ottawa, but I don't think this will be a winning formula for him.
All right, let me get a final thought from you on all of this, John.
Yeah, I think JD's right. It's clearly about the Ontario election next year. Ford's numbers have tumbled. They're neck and neck, or if not behind the Ontario Liberals. I'm not so sure it's unsalvageable, though. I mean, we saw Boris Johnson in the UK, who was down and out, apparently, and yet the vaccine rollout went very well, and now he's winning by-elections. So,
and he's running around telling everybody in Britain it's time for hugs and pints again.
Right. I mean, things have worked out for the Conservatives, and they're looking a year down the road. They're thinking, well, if we keep the restrictions on until June, and don't do what we did last time, which was take the restrictions off too early, and we get a third wave. So as long as we don't get a fourth wave, we roll out the vaccinations and we blame Ottawa for the borders. And in some ways, he's got a point on the borders. The federal government says it's only 2% of people of 2% of cases, yet we know that the variants came in through airports. So that will resonate with people, I think.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on all of it. Thanks again to all of you for joining me again tonight. We'll talk next week. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.